Mankind, a species deemed to once be faithful, yet against all odds survived the ever-changing impacts of planet Earth and evolution itself. Through the descent of early societies to the expansion of empires and grand civilizations, humanity itself has learned the art of greed, and thus leads to strive for gold and silver. However, mankind itself desires a new lust: blood. This deeming aspiration brings down even the greatest of empires that our world has ever seen. From the mythological lands of Greece, to the collapse of the city of Rome, to the plaguing downfall of the Egyptian Empire. Humanity itself has been bred into a new killing machine, one that isn't machinery, but humanity itself. It is only through the introduction to the modern era that we begin to see the true manifestation of mankind's psychological evolution. A new form of warfare, the thirst for innocent life, the desire to continually advance as a civilization. And it is through these manifestations that we begin to see the true intent of the most powerful species on the planet. It is here we begin to see mankind's story, our real story.
War, a state of armed conflict between different nations and states, or different groups within a nation or state. War is the first option, and politics are used to set order and regulations. A war generally involves the use of weapons, a military organization, and soldiers. War is the biggest reason for mass distraction across the globe. It heavily impacts not only the country involved in the conflict, but also the world. One of many significant wars that took place and is still remembered to this day is World War II, also known as the Second World War, was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. It involved the vast majority of the world's countries, including all the great powers. It was the most widespread war in history, and directly involved more than 100 million people from over 30 countries. It is highly exaggerated to this day because those who started it were trying to use racist imperialism and violence to spread their views and control over people whom they regarded as inferior races.
Germany and Japan could both have used the economic domination of the regions around them to expand their influence and turn those nations into independent client states, but that was not enough. They wanted to take over and control them totally, and to do that, they used force on an unprecedented scale. In addition, Germany had a policy of exterminating Jews, Gypsies, Catholics, homosexuals, communists, trade unionists, and Slavic people not just in Germany itself, but in the areas that they were conquered. This was the degree of evil seldom seen in recent memory. It had to be stopped. Although that was not the primary reason the Allies went to war, it had a large effect on their resolve. Most wars ended in negotiated settlements, and the government that started it usually allowed to stay in power. World War II is unusual in that it ended in the total surrender of the main aggressor nations. It was imperative that those governments be completely replaced. Many were revealed. The Second World War consisted of many fatal wars that caused the mass death of civilians, such as the Holocaust. 6 million European Jews were killed by Adolf Hitler. The victims included 1.5 million children and constituted about 2/3 of the 9 million Jews who had resided in continental Europe. A broader definition of the Holocaust includes non-Jewish victims of the Najwa campaign of mass murder. From 1941 to 1945, Jews were systematically murdered in the largest genocide in history, which was part of a broader aggregate of acts of repression and killings of various ethnic and political groups in Europe. Under the coordination of the SS, major paramilitary organized with directions from the highest leadership of the Nazi Party. Every arm of Germany's bureaucracy was involved in both the logistics and the carrying out the mass murder. Killings took place throughout German-occupied Europe, as well as within Nazi Germany and across all territories controlled by its allies. Another major example would be the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At the order of President Harry S. Truman during the final stage of World War II, the United States dropped nuclear weapons on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6 and 9, 1945. The United States had dropped the bombs with the consent of the UK as outlined in the Quebec Agreement. The two bombings, which killed at least 129,000 people, remained the only use of nuclear weapons for warfare in history. In the final year of the war, the Allies prepared for what was anticipated to be a very costly invasion of the Japanese mainland. This was preceded by a U.S. conventional and firebombing campaign that destroyed 67 of Japan's cities. The war in Europe had concluded when Nazi Germany signed its Instrument of Surrender on May 8, 1945. The Japanese, facing the same fate, refused to accept the Allies' demands for unconditional surrender, and the Pacific War continued. The Allies called for the unconditional surrender of the Japanese armed forces in the Potsdam Declaration of July 26, 1945. The alternative being prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese response to this ultimatum was to ignore it. On August 6, the U.S. dropped a Uranian gun-type bomb on Hiroshima, and American President Harry S. Truman called for Japan's surrender, warning it to expect the rain of ruin from the air, the likes of which has never been seen on this earth. 3 days later, on August 9, a plutonium-type bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Within the first 4 months following the bombings, the acute effects of the atomic bombings had killed 90,000 to 146,000 people in Hiroshima and 39,000 to 80,000 in Nagasaki. During the following month, large numbers died from the effect of burns, radiation sickness, and other injuries, compounded by illness and malnutrition. Japan announced the surrender to the Allies on August 15, 6 days after the bombings on Nagasaki and the Soviet Union declaration of war. On September 2nd, the Japanese government signed the Instrument of Surrender, effectively ending World War II. These two wars heavily affected our world. The Holocaust not only affected all the survivors and harmed the souls that were ill, but the Holocaust also impacted our world to this day. The Holocaust just gives an example of how prejudiced our society can be. The Holocaust made everyone stop and really think that you should not get too comfortable in the state that you are at, because it can get stripped away from you in a second. The Holocaust today still affects us by the government cracking down. In today's society, you are taught from one day to treat others like you want to be treated. You are taught that discrimination is a sin. This genocide shows as if that was okay to kill off certain people because of their religion. Unlike the Holocaust, only the people that were included in the Hiroshima-Nagasaki War were heavily affected. Since they were the only ones exposed to the radiation, they were the most affected. Their genes eventually became mutated, and chronic illnesses were easily found in their bodies. We stand at a point in history where we may have averted military action with unknown consequences on the other end. That is the point where we should recognize that we will be better served in the future if we can arrive at an understanding of when acts of war are or are not justified, and thereby avoid some of the confusion we recently experienced. War, for purposes of this discussion, is not limited to lengthy engagement or troops on the ground, but includes any acts of war. Traditionally, there are three basic forms of justifiable war: defensive war, war in defense of an ally usually in conjunction with a mutual defense treaty, and war directed by international consensus. In the past 3/4 of a century, we have attempted to add several new classifications of just war. These definitions may be incomplete and may, from time to time, overlap, but include preemptive war, humanitarian war, and regime change war. Defense war is the most clearly justified and generally involves a direct attack by another nation or outside force on one's own territory or physical assets. This is the most common definition of just war. For most of our history, we justified war as defensive based on attacks on America or her assets. The Maine, the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, the Gulf of Tonkin are examples. Yes, some of these may have been put-up jobs, but there was at least an attempt to frame justiciability in terms of defense following direct attack on our territory or assets. War in defense of an ally is best exemplified by America's entrance into the European theater of World War II. These types of wars can also be put-up jobs, like coming to the defense of Texas and not stopping until we controlled what is now the entire southwestern United States. Wars of international consensus in today's world would be largely confined by UN authorization, a difficult hurdle given the various veto powers and interests represented on the Security Council. With traditional rationales for just war, sometimes failing to account what certain leaders believe is a cause for war, we have embarked on an intellectual stretch to expand the definition of what constitutes a just war. Given the difficulty of containing warfare and preventing put-up jobs under the traditional just war definitions, the difficulty increases exponentially with the addition of other classes and forms of just war. Preemption as a rationale for war is not new, but gained credibility as a result of Israel's use of this approach after its national inception. Objectively viewed, it has also been used as an excuse for unauthorized territorial expansion that continues to the present day. In the purest form, say a military strike to take out a nuclear weapons faculty in a hostile country, preemption may have considerable appeal. But there are not clear lines that define the necessity of preemption. If you don't initially believe this, please recall that Bush II attempted to justify the invasion of Iraq in part as a preemptive strike. If preemption is going to be a justification for war, then it must be defined with precision. It must, at the very least, avoid speculative assertions such as the possibility of a mushroom cloud in our future. But better, in my opinion, would be the elimination of preemption as a rationale for war. If you believe an enemy is arming to attack, prepare to defend, rather than preempt. Preemption requires absolute certainty of not only armament, but also the intent to attack. Those two certainties are rarely the case. Regime change wars are the removal of a leader or political component that we find either offensive or not acting in our interests, or consorting with our adversaries. The easiest reach for proposing a regime change war is the dictator who oppresses his or own people. The problems with regime change wars are many. First, who decides which regimes need changing if there is no international consensus? Second, is a regime change war really a proxy war between competing international interests? It often is. Third, what will the replacement regime be? Would Al-Qaeda-related leaders replace Bashar al-Assad? Without international consensus, regime change wars are an invitation to abuse and should not constitute a rationale for just war.
Hello, I'm here greeted with Mr. Margot, a veteran, here to tell me a story and answer some questions. The first question I'd like to ask would be, of course, where were you drafted and or enlisted?
So I wasn't drafted. I was enlisted. I walked into a recruiting station in Kentwood, Michigan, in the area where I grew up, and went and talked to a couple of recruiters. Ended up choosing the Navy as my branch of service, and then about 6 months later, I left for boot camp.
Why did you join?
I joined for a couple of reasons. I was working a really crappy job that I didn't really want to do for the rest of my life, and I needed the ability to pay for school, and I needed to also find a way to live at the same time, and I wasn't going to take as many loans as most students did, so I decided to join the military, and one of the reasons I chose the Navy was because I get to travel a little bit more through the Navy than other branches.
When you became like a military member or Navy member, what was your job or assignment?
So I was an aviation electrician's mate, which means that I worked on all electrical panels and electrical systems throughout an F-18 Super Hornet. So I was responsible for where all power moves throughout the jet, from the engine to the generators to the front cab, through the weapons systems and the radar, through the fuel cells, and back through the rest of the engine.
Do you know any of your most memorable moments that you had during the time you were enlisted?
I've got a couple of them. Some I probably shouldn't talk about, but one of my favorites was actually knowing that we got a call one night in 2008 that a Marine squadron had been pinned down, and we needed to get into what we call a ready up 7, which means that every squadron on the flight deck of a carrier is in a ready status. The pilot is sitting in the seat, and if, God forbid, the worst thing kind of happens, meaning the pending overrun of a U.S. military force is about to happen or imminent, we launch our entire aircraft. It's supposed to happen within 7 minutes. Carriers keep unofficial times because we like to keep track and compete with each other. We launched all 60 aircraft in 3 minutes and 14 seconds.
That's pretty impressive.
We were able to get all of the aircraft that we needed to inbound to where they were supposed to go, and they saved that Marine battalion that had been trapped and gunned down on both sides, and they only ended up with one casualty after being literally surrounded by the enemy.
When you were enlisted, how did you stay in touch with your family, or how did you make it feel more like home?
So sometimes you can't. You know, it's the same thing day in and day out. One of the things that a lot of people in the Navy deal with or don't deal with very well is that your scenery never changes. You know, for 9 months on my first deployment or 14 months on my second deployment, the scenery doesn't change. You get used to the same room, you get used to nothing but blue around you and the same people day in and day out. So it becomes, you know, somewhat of a family right there with who you're working with, because you depend on them to stay safe and they depend on you to stay safe. With family back home, thanks to modern technology, we're able to email back and forth, but it's not as instantaneous as it seems today while you're here in the United States. You know, it takes a little while. Sometimes it can be hours. Sometimes it can be, you know, 30 or 40 minutes or whatever. Well, I sent that, you know, last night or whatever, and they got it at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's just, you know, the way it works with communication, because sometimes our stuff is stored on the ship before it actually gets sent out through sort of the information that is out there.
Is this so you don't leak very vital or very important information?
Partially, but when there are times that go through security reasons, we had a security malfunction in 2010 and 2011 where we needed to make sure some of the things that we were doing were protecting private security for not just American interests, but our personal ones. If people find out where an American carrier is, we become an instant target. So for that reason, we go into different modes of connectivity, and depending on how high up you are on the ladder, you're still able to connect with people, or you're not. In the 2011 instance that I referred to, we did not have any communications with anybody outside of our boat for about 40 days.
That seems like a long time. And finally, for my last question, is do you think war is justifiable? And if when, why?
Before I sort of answer that, I will say that I don't think there are any winners in war. However, I do think war is justifiable, especially within the terms of trying to defend human rights. If there is anybody outside of the causes of human rights, they're infringing upon things that were given to us by God, and it is meant for all of us to protect each other regardless of the government above them.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Humanitarian wars are those that tug at the heartstrings and seem to demand justice. This is a relatively modern invention, sometimes referred to as benevolent militarism. The just war rationale is that whatever collateral damage, death and destruction may be caused by the acts of war, it will prevent even worse atrocities that would occur in the absence of war. Humanitarian wars also assume that the death and destruction inflicted by the war will be less than the death and destruction resulting from not going to war. Punitive wars seek to punish a regime for an act or series of acts in hopes of deterring future similar acts by that regime. It does not depend on international consensus, does not depend on defense of self or allies, and is not designed even to preemptive nature. In all contemplation of war, the first instinct should be not war. In all contemplation of war, that first instinct should also include the exhaustion of all alternatives, even in defense war situations. In all contemplation of war, if the advocates of war need more than one approach to convince different people based upon different sensibilities, they probably are not describing a just war. And always look for other excuses. Other agendas may be served by war. They almost always exist.
Good afternoon. My name is Zahra Telkani here, interviewing Jafar Al-Musawi about his experience in the first Iraqi war. So, Mr. Al-Musawi, could you please explain and go into specific about the war you were involved in?
Actually, I was involved with Iraqi-Iranian war in 1988. So during the war, I joined the army in 1987. as an artillery position.
So how did this war affect your life?
Actually, it's affect my life because a lot, because I lost all my brothers and I lost sisters, cousins. It's a lot of lovely people, from my childhood.
So throughout this war, were you part of the civilization or were you part of the army?
Actually, both time. I joined the army in 1987, so I was civilian before that. Because the war was beginning in 1980 till 1988. I was civilian in first 4 years, before I joined the army.
Did this war affect you as a person?
Yes,
How?
because so I lost my brothers, and I didn't join what I have graduate. I have a bachelor degree, and I didn't do my job over there in Iraq and destroy all the economy, everything in my country, destroy my country.
So since they destroyed your country, why did you participate in the warfare?
This enforcement, I have no choice. I have to.
You had to be involved?
Yeah.
Did you lose anyone to the war besides your close friends?
I lost a lot. I lost my 3 brothers. I lost my cousin, my lovely, beautiful friend.
God forbid, if you would go back into the past, would you change anything about the war?
Actually, yes, I do. Why I'm gonna carry the people? They do not go to the war, to second war, because I know how painful it is.
Would you participate again in the army?
No.
So were you imprisoned in any of these years?
I was in prison, 1 year.
Why?
After I escaped from Iraqi army, I escaped from the army. I didn't reject, to fight, for nothing,
So knowing that you had a position in the army, people would say that you would be on the army side, that the war was fair, but hearing your responses, what is your response to the war being fair or not?
It's not, the war is not fair actually, because it's for nothing, for politics. So I am not agree with any war over there, declared by just only by one person,
Would you say this war influenced any genocide on the civilians?
Yeah,
How so?
it's genocide, because there's many people being killed for nothing, innocent people, discrimination, races, a lot of things,
And it was all because of the president.
Yep.
Yeah. So you said that some things that you saw during the war, did it ever change you? Did it change who you were before to now?
Yes, I have a lot of big change, I saw the freedom since then I came here to United States, there is freedom. I can do whatever I want to do. I went to the college, I finished my college. Also, I have a quality control associate license in America. So I changed my life a lot because the freedom, because I have a lot of options, to do.
Do you have any past memories, anything that still affects you
Yeah,
emotionally?
yeah.
Yes?
I remember when they took my brothers, my friends, to the jail and execution them in 1980. This affected me a lot, when I go back around and remember those things, as it was very childish, it's still painful to me, and I feel it all time.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
After all this chaos, would you say that war is justifiable, that the war that was caused could have been dealt in another way?
Yeah,
Yeah?
yeah.
Well, thank you. That is all the time we have for today, and I am so sorry for what happened to you and for all your loss.
Thank you.
And
Thank
hopefully
you,
the
Sarah.
future will be better for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you have a great time, okay?
You too.
Genocide is the purposeful killing of a large group of people, especially those of a specific ethnic group or nation. The word genocide can be comprehended in many ways. The root of the word has a meaning that reflects in the work of the author, Raphael Lemkin. He created the word by combining geno, the Greek word for race, and side,
which is a Latin word for killing. Unfortunately, there were many genocides in history and many today that most people don't even know happened. However, there are also a few that are widely known by the world. A prime example of a genocide that is very well known that also occurred with a high risk of casualties is the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a very huge part of history that changed not only the lives of those affected by it, but also affected our story. Due to this unfortunate historical event, people made it a priority to ensure the safety of our people to avoid something like this from ever happening again. The Holocaust was a systematic killing of 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis. The Nazis were brought to power in Germany, and they believed that Germans were superior to everyone, especially the Jews, who they classified as inferior alien-like objects. It did not stop there. They also targeted groups such as gypsies, disabled people, the Polish, the Russians, and basically any human who were not a part of the Aryan race. Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany, and the cause of all these issues, was also the reason that sparked World War II. Germany invaded Poland from the west, and the Soviet Union invaded from the east. This caused retaliation from Britain and France, igniting the infamous World War II. This proves that it did not just stop at genocide with Hitler, but his leadership stimulated a war as well. Genocide is an occurrence that, no matter who it happens to, should be acknowledged and known as a global issue. A lesser known genocide that people tend to know nothing about is the Armenian Genocide. This genocide occurred from April 24, 1915 to 1917. The Turkish government were the ones behind this horrific tragedy, with the intent to rid as many Americans living in the Ottoman Empire as possible. When this all began, there were approximately 2 million Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire at the time of the expulsion. Once everything reached an end, there was a count of about 1.5 million Armenians dead, and many forced to flee the country. Interestingly enough, it is obvious to call this turn of events a genocide. However, Turkey does not acknowledge it as such, despite the objections of the advocates and Armenians who insist otherwise. In fact, it is still illegal to this day to discuss any of what happened in the Armenian genocide in Turkey. Despite how hard the world tries to keep genocides from occurring, it is sad to say we still see things like this happening today. Currently, we have a genocide in the process happening in Syria. Since its outbreak in March 2011, the conflict in Syria has cost the lives of more than 400,000, displaced many others, and involved numerous crimes against humanity. 7 years after the Holocaust, despite promises of never again, a regime is targeting its own people while the government does nothing. The result of this conflict is a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions.
Technology has been a blessing in countless ways. However, these blessings come with an unruly curse. Not long ago, we were introduced to a new era where our world advanced from men and women in caves to women and men under a roof. This advancement is now identified as technology. Some technology used during World War II developed during the interwar between the 1920s and 1930s, while others were developed when the war ended. World War II had the greatest effect on technology than any other war on technology and devices that are used today. In World War II, technology played a greater role than in any other war in history. Many technologies were made for military usage in general, such as weaponry like ships, vehicles, aircraft, artillery, small arms, and biological chemical weapons. World War II was the first war where military operations widely targeted the research efforts of the enemy based on their technology. Advances in technology were made in every aspect of warfare, but mainly with aircraft carriers and submarines. Aeronautics, meaning air navigation, had very little success at the start of wars. It, however, was very useful during actions at Taranto, Pearl Harbor, and the Battle of the Coral Sea, where it was established as the dominant capital during battleship. Land warfare moved from the bloody front lines of World War I to increased mobility and combined arms. The tank was used very frequently during the First World War, but is now just a primary weapon. During the 1930s, the tank design was more advanced than it was during the First World War. Going on to World War II, the tank advanced even more with increases in speed, firepower, and armor. Genocide, an era of fear for many races, genders, and religions. The technology used that caused the heard and unheard screams were revolting. In 1939, the Nazis began experimenting with poison gas for the purpose of mass murder. They used a poison so deadly called euthanasia on Germans, who they deemed were unworthy of life because of a mental or physical disability. There were 6 gas chambers installed after the agreement to use euthanasia: Bernburg, Brandenburg, Greifswald, Hadamar, Hartheim, and Sonnenstein. These killing centers were made purely of carbon monoxide gas. The spark of World War II. Pearl Harbor and nuclear power. Bombs dropping from aircraft aeronautics one by one, attacking U.S. territory. No mercy and no second thoughts. Get the job done, then get out, was the Japanese two-step rule. Attacking the U.S. base in Pearl Harbor was the #1 priority. Pearl Harbor was a surprise military attack by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service against the U.S. Naval Base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, making this the spark of World War II. The base was attacked by 353 Imperial Japanese fighter planes, bombers, and torpedo planes in 2 waves, launched from 6 aircraft carriers. December 7th was just about the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor from the Japanese, but from an engineering standpoint, it was also about a vivid snapshot of extraordinary new weaponry for war. Japan sent about 40 new advanced torpedo bombers into Pearl Harbor's deep waters. Usually, torpedoes only managed correctly if fired aground in depths of 75 feet. However, the new advanced one worked astonishingly past those limitations with massive explosives that took out U.S. ships. Another weapon they used was a submarine called the Type A Itakuki midget submarine. It was armed with torpedoes and mines attached to its side to be used for close-range striking. This highly advanced technology made the U.S. advance their weaponry highly after losing many ships to the Japanese. It made the Japanese advance their equipment even more after seeing all of the weaponry the U.S. had on their base. Later on, both sides unleashed new machines designed to control the thought of a surprise. Technology today. Ways technology is making our lives easier. Technology has made just about anything possible. It helped the blind see, the deaf hear, the paralyzed to walk, and most times even run. Over the years, all of man's efforts in creating things such as the light bulb or the telephone, it all had one purpose: making life easy. The days of writing long letters and waiting for the long delivery days are long gone. Technology has made communication faster and more flexible with just a tap of your thumb on your phone or a click of a button on your computer, and your documents or messages is sent or saved within seconds. Education made fun. Technology has given us the opportunity to have virtual classrooms. No more sitting around in classrooms for long hours. Now you can get a real one-on-one lesson and learn much faster with less students. Technology has also made it possible for us to carry money virtually, have business meetings between 2 different countries and still see each other, and know about what's going on around you 24/7 with news. Ways technology is ruining our lives. Today, as a whole human race, most people are occupied by their phones using Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and or Snapchat. But no one really takes the time to have real-life conversations anymore. Yes, we do have conversations, but it's virtually. All of our important conversations are via text now. Remember when sending a breakup text was the worst kind of text anyone could hit the send button for? Whether it's via text or on any social media, our most important conversations happen there. With the arguments, the confessions, and the rejections, they still happen virtually. However, that's deemed okay now. Technology has caused us to know less about each other, but know more than we should. We don't spend hours with the people we care about or are interested in anymore. Now, we stalk each other on Instagram, watch their stories on Snapchat more times than needed, and or wait for their next tweet. Within minutes, we know everything about that person without actually talking to them. Technology has caused our attention spans to drop drastically. Today, We can't even watch a full movie or sit in a college class lecture without checking our phones. Most of the time, phones are checked for no reason. As a human race, we use our phones for the simplest things, such as the time when there's a clock right in front of us. But we're too lazy to actually remember that you read the big hand before you look at the small hand on the clock. Technology is a true blessing, but the blessings soon turn into curses when the human race goes too far.